Hello everyone, and welcome back. In this week's lessons, we're going to explore how to grab data from the web in real time using APIs, or Application Programming Interfaces. So last week we talked about bringing static data from spreadsheets. So this week and then the following week as well, we're going to explore the idea of using APIs to get more real-time data. So query web databases and then get data from them. So in order to do this, we're going to have to get a little bit more technical this week. And the first thing we're going to talk about before we even get into APIs is going to be this idea of retrieving files from other servers when we're programming in JavaScript. So let's get into it and give an example. Second here. Okay. So I'm on our usual class template here. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to fetch an HTML file from a remote website. This is going to be the first step in querying a web API. It's going to be using the HTTP protocol to retrieve data from a remote website. And we're going to see that we're going to run into some hurdles trying to do this in the browser. So let me just remix the blank template here into a random sketch just to demonstrate what I'm talking about. So just for example purposes here, let's go to some random website here. I like to use blarg.com. I think it wants to have the www maybe. Okay. All right, so it's not secure here. This is just some random web page and if we look at the source here, this is the HTML page, right? This is the index.html that's located at blarg.com. So when we open this web page, what happens is our browser uses the protocol called HTTP, right? That all the URLs are formatted using, and it says, please send me the index.html page that is at blarg.com. And so we retrieve this file over here. The server sends us this file, and then the browser interprets it and renders it as a web page over here. So this is going to be the basis for web APIs. We're going to use the HTTP protocol to formulate queries, searches against web APIs. We're not going to simply retrieve HTML. We're going to retrieve formatted data in formats like JSON and XML. There's going to be lots of acronyms this week, and we'll explain those in the next video. But first off, just as a simple example, let's say we wanted to just grab the raw HTML from this web page. Well, we could try to do this in P5. There's a function called load strings. So load strings will take, let's say, a file that you have access to and load every line of the file as an array of strings. You could also try to open a URL or a link that's on a remote server. For example, we could try to open this link, right? So this implies index.html. When we don't put anything after the slash, that's the implication over here. So we could say, please load string, open this website, and put the resulting strings from the index.html into this variable called data. And then we could log the output. See what happens. So it seems simple enough, but once we open our console here, I'm going to open my console. We're going to see that we're going to run into some problems. Let me clear that here just to make sure we get the correct error. Okay, so it wants it to be served over HTTPS. Let's try that. Content is blocked. Oh, it's called load strings, sorry. Let's take out the S. Let's refresh. Okay, lots of errors. Obviously, this isn't working. it's having a problem reading the file. Okay, we could try another URL here. What about some other website? Just see what happens. I hit refresh. Okay, so we're not able to load these pages, and that's because of this problem over here, where first of all, I was having some issues here mixing HTTP and HTTPS. The S stands for secure, and glitch is using HTTPS, right? So it's doesn't like that combination over here. But nonetheless, so let's say, for example, we're trying to fetch the HTML at news.google.ca. If we try to do this from the browser, right, we're going to get into this error that's over here that says our request has been blocked by something called CORS policy, right? So CORS stands for cross-origin resource sharing policy. And what that means basically in short is that it's preventing our browser over here from accessing a resource that's on a different server. That's because the browser has more restrictive security policies that prevent, shady websites from pretending to be something and then actually accessing content from somewhere else. There are some exceptions to that. For example, we did run into that problem last week when we tried to open a CSV file from the Google spreadsheet server. That's because on their end, they didn't set any cross-access policies, so we were able to open that file even though we were running from the browser as a client. But in most cases, you won't be able to open URLs directly, you won't be able to download resources directly, and as a result, we won't be able to access web APIs directly from the browser, from the client side of things. So what's the solution? Well, what we're going to explore this week, before we even jump into APIs, is we're going to talk about server-side programming. And we're going to do that. It's going to be a very shallow introduction. This is a deep topic. We're going to essentially set up a new blank sketch that we can use that's going to give us a little bit of scaffolding on how to program things on the server as opposed to the client. Okay, so what do I mean by this? Well, currently, when we're writing our P5 sketch using glitch, right, we're doing what's called client-side programming. That means we're writing a script that's going to run in the browser only, and everything that's in the backend, like the web server, it's all handled by glitch for us. So all we worry about is our HTML and our sketch.javascript file, and when we go to this URL, which is our web page that we're developing, everything that we're programming is existing in the browser, on the client side, right, on the person that's opening the web page browser. And as a result, we have some security restrictions as to what we're allowed to do, what websites we're able to access outside of the client, and so forth. Now, what we can do on Glitch, the great thing about Glitch is that it allows us to create projects that will allow server-side programming as well as client-side at the same time. So in this simple version, all the server-side stuff is handled by Glitch, but we can also write our own web server if we wanted to. There are many ways that you can write a web server, but on Glitch, we're going to do this using an environment called Node.js. Okay? So Node.js, it is a JavaScript runtime that allows you to program JavaScript not in the browser, but on the server. So we're going to write some code on Glitch's servers that will have two jobs. One is going to be to serve the web pages that we're writing, so our index.html and our script. But then also we're going to be able to provide, you write code on the server that's going to access these remote resources for us and then relay the content back to our P5 sketch. It's going to act as kind of an intermediary or like a middleman. So let's get into it. It's going to start to make a little bit more sense once we develop our template, and we're going to explain things as we go along. So let's go to Glitch over here, and let's create a new project. And we are going to create a Hello Node project. So Glitch has a couple of like templates here. Keep in mind where you're not going to have to do this down the road. What we're going to do in this first lesson is we're going to build a new template that has all of the server-side elements kind of in place for you to jump right in. But I'm going to walk you through the process of creating this new template just so you understand what's happening behind the scenes. Okay? But this is not something you're going to have to do every time you want to do an example that uses web APIs. So much like we did in the first week of class, right? What we're going to do here is we're going to create a new blank template that we can then reuse for future examples. So let's call this our blank template that uses Node.js as the server. Okay, whatever. All right, so this is already providing us with a template that uses a Node.js server. They use a server-side framework called Fastify. We're not going to dive into the details of it too much. There's many different frameworks out there. It's a bit of a wild west. So what we're going to do first here is just going to delete stuff. So we start with an even more blank template and try to keep things straightforward. So we're going to delete these files that we don't necessarily want here because we're going to create our own. Okay, so we don't. Let's get rid of this license file too. Let's get rid of the README. And my goal here is just to create as bare bones of a template as possible, and just so we have less possible things to get confused about. Okay, so this is going to be the main GS script, and we're going to remove some things from here as well that we're not going to need for our example. We're not going to need that. We are going to need the route here, but none of that. And don't worry, we will get into explaining all this in just a second as soon as I'm done deleting all the stuff we don't need. It's going to be a little bit easier to get into it without all the extra stuff. Okay. All right, so our server is not responding. That's fine. We're going to fix that in a second. Okay. All right, so by the way, when we develop, so now when we're writing code in server.js, what's happening is we're actually writing JavaScript code that's not going to run in the browser. It's running on the Glitch server remotely. So it allows us to run code on their server, and the console that we're going to open to see what we're doing is going to be available over here in the logs. Okay. I'm going to clear that log here. Okay. And last thing we're going to do. Okay, so let's just kind of rebuild something that we can work with here. So like I said, we're not going to go into too much detail into the Node.js programming. We're just going to build enough that we can access web APIs and do some translation of data from remote servers back to our P5.js script. So this portion over here, this is the first bit that we're going to talk about. So this defines the static files that our server is going to be providing whenever we visit the URL. And it says here it's going to put them in a directory named public. So over here, we're going to create a directory named public, and we're going to add an index.html file. Okay. In that index file, I'm going to put some text here just so we see that it works. Okay. This is being defined here. And I'm going to comment out this route because I think it is confusing things a little bit. Okay. All right, so now we can refresh here and we see that the stuff I just put into index.html, is being served here as my web page. So anything we put into the public folder, right, is going to be kind of the equivalent of our blank sketch that we had before, which actually, let me bring that back up. Where did it go? Now let's just make a new one. or let's open RTA82 blank here. So what we're going to do is just bring in the index.html and the sketch that we had for our blank sketch. Okay, we're going to bring that into our Node version so that we have our two files that we can edit here, our index and our sketch. Okay? So I'm going to just copy and paste from our template that we used to work with before. Okay? So now this is now our template, and now it's missing the the sketch.js. So we're going to add sketch.js. Okay, and let's grab our template here, put it in sketch.js, and just so we can see it's working, let's set a black background for this template, and let's draw a little circle following the mouse. Okay. Circle with an R. Okay, cool. So what we have now is we have a server that we can program on Glitch, written in Node.js using this framework called Fastify, which is a quick, fast, easy to deploy web server. There's many different flavors of that, but this is the one they use in their template. This is the one we're going to use. And the first thing we did is we set up some static files that our server is providing when we visit the link that we created. Okay. So anything that's in the public directory, right, becomes the website that we're serving. So this is in many ways equivalent to this directory over here, right? We have index and sketch. So this is the template we use when we created a simple static website using Glitch. If we want to replicate that using a web server that we can program, this is now going to look like this. The only thing we are missing is we are getting those annoying errors here. So we are also going to add the eslint rc.json file that we use in our template. And I'm just going to copy all that stuff over into here and then hit the refresh button. And remember, the goal of this file here is simply to get rid of those errors when we're programming, because they're irritating. Okay. So what's the point of doing all this work? Well, if we're back to square one. Okay, so now we have our index page that we can edit. We have our sketch, so we can do everything we used to do before in our template, and we can have that happen over here. Well, the big benefit is now we have this server file that we can edit. So the server not only can serve static files, okay, it can also serve dynamic web pages, which means it's going to prepare the content of the HTTP response, the web page that it's serving, on the fly. And in Fastify, this is called a route. So let's define a route here, just to see how this works. So this route over here, it would be the index route, right? When we put a slash, we don't want that because we already have an index.html that's being served statically over here. So we're going to give this route a name. Let's call it query. Okay? So when we define a route, so this is going to be a GET request. Okay? This is going to be the name of the query, the route, we call it query. And then this function over here is going to define some code that we can program that's going to run whenever this URL is being accessed. Okay? And the function has two parameters. It has a request and a reply. And I'm going to rename request to REQ now so we don't get confused down the road. Okay. The reply object we can use to send something back when we access this route. Okay, so I could say reply.send, hello there. Okay, so this would say when we open the URL query, right, it's going to send this text to the browser. So let's try it out. The way we can test it quickly here is I'm going to click on change URL. So change URL allows me to specify something after the slash here when I open my Glitch program. So I'm going to put in query. Okay. This is the route that I just created. And we can see here, we're getting this text back. Okay. Hello there, right? So anything that we reply over here, right, is going to be received by the client over there. So now we have this URL, and this is going to work, of course, outside of the Glitch editor if we just put this link, right? this is what we're getting back. It's not even HTML, it's just raw text. Okay. So this is important because now we can program in JavaScript here what the server is going to send back when we access this URL called query. Okay. For example, we could say if we had a way to open a URL here, which we will in a second, we could fetch the content of a remote web page, let's say the news page we were trying to access before, and take its content, send it back to our program using this query URL. Okay? The one thing about accessing URLs from the client side is that you're allowed to access any URL that's within the domain name that you're using, within the name of your program. So we can stay within everything that is RTA842 node blank.glitch.me. Any URL that's part of this domain, we're going to be allowed to access in our sketch here. Okay, so we can create our own URL. For example, I could now say load strings, and I could put this URL right, inside load strings, semicolon, and then we can log the result. And if I look at the console, let's open the index. Okay. I'm going to get an array back here with the text that's being output by this URL. Okay. So I'm allowed to do that on the client side because this is within the sandbox that the client is allowed to access, because these are URLs coming from the website we're currently accessing. Okay. So this is important because now we can create our own almost like a proxy, right? Our own middleman on the server. If we need to access outside information, we're going to write some code on the server here to access that outside information and then send it back, right? Send it back using reply so that our sketch can have access to it. Okay. So for example, let's say we wanted to, like, now this is just sending some random text. Let's say we wanted to open a remote web page. Okay. Now, when we're writing Node.js on the server, we don't have access to P5.js functions like load strings, right? All those things, load table, and so forth. These are P5.js. There's a way that we could bring that in on the server side, but we're going to take a different route here. So we're going to use a library for Node.js called request. So first, we're going to import the library into our sketch. So we're going to edit this package.json here. And while I'm here, I'm going to delete the packages that we don't need, that were part of the original template. And I'm going to add this request package. Remember, you're not going to have to do this down the road for your own projects. This is just kind of a walkthrough of what's happening behind the scenes in order to create this new blank template. So this request package here is a simplified HTTP request client. In other words, it allows us to make HTTP requests, ask for remote data using HTTP in Node.js on the server. So I'm going to include the package. This file here, package.json, defines the different libraries that our server-side code is going to be using. So here we can see we're using the Fastify library, the Fastify static package that allows us to create the static server, and then we added this request library to the node environment. So jumping back to our server, the way that we import libraries in Node.js is this way. So we're going to create a variable called request. So this is how we're going to access the library, and we are going to use require request. Okay, so this is now including the request library. Okay? And now we have a handle for it inside this as this variable called request. So how does request work? Well, it allows us to say provide a URL. Okay, so for example, news.google.ca, just some random URL here. And then we're going to define a function that's going to run once the the results from this request have come back. So the function is going to take 3 parameters. There's this first parameter. If there's an error, it's going to be available in this object. It has a response object and a body object. Then we're going to open and close some curly brackets. Okay. And I'm going to get rid of the reply here, because what we want to do is inside inside this request here, the body is going to be the content of the web page that we just requested. This is the thing that we are going to send back when we access the query URL. Okay. So now, if we take a look at our console here, right, we can see we're getting a huge, massive array, right? This is this data array over here because we're using load strings, and then we're doing this URL here, right? This is triggering this route on the server that we define, query. And what this route is doing is saying fetch the HTML at news.google.ca. This is coming back to us in the body variable, and then we're simply sending this back to the website that made the query in the first place. In this case, it's our sketch. And then we're getting this information down over here. Another way to see this would be to simply take this URL, right, that we wrote, and just put it in the browser over here. And then we can see we're getting the raw HTML from news.google.ca. Okay. This could be any website. Obviously, I don't know what we would do with this. This is not very helpful. It's just, especially this page, you can see there's a lot of junk there. But the point is, now we have a pathway, right, that we can open URLs remotely, and we can send that information back to our sketch, right, using this URL, this route that we created on our server. So we've kind of worked around a limitation we had before that prevented us from going outside from the client, right, from the browser. It prevented us to go outside to talk to other servers on the internet for security reasons. So now the way that we go around this is we say, all right, no problem. We're going to write our own server. The server is the one that's going to go talk to the others because it's allowed to do that. The server is going to go talk to the others, and it's going to fetch whatever information we're interested in from these remote sites, and it's going to pass that information back through a URL that we get to define. And we can create as many of these routes as we want. And now we are able to open these because these live in the same, on the same kind of base URL, right, as our sketch itself. So now we are able to load strings from this URL that we made up, right? Triggers this route in the server because it's query over here and it's query over here. So this is the route that we created. We could have called it anything. I just picked query as a name because we needed to give it a name. And then all this route is doing is requesting some remote data and then sending it back once it receives it. So we get this middleman thing happening. Okay, so let's generalize this a little bit because we're creating a template here and we want this to be able to open more URLs than just news.google.ca. Okay, so it would be nice if on this end over here, right, we could specify, which URL we want to open. So the way that we can do this is by adding a parameter to this URL that we're creating. Okay, so the syntax for adding parameters is going to be something like this. So once we have our URL here, we're going to put a question mark, okay? And then we're going to add a parameter to this. And let's call this parameter URL, okay? And we'll say equal. Now, it's a little bit annoying to put forward slashes in here because this is part of the right? It's part of the way paths are structured and in URLs. So we're going to leave the HTTPS : // out. We're just going to put the name of the URL that we are loading up. Okay, so let's say whatever, ryerson.ca, or let's go back to news.google.ca as an example. So now what we're doing is we're adding a parameter to our URL. Okay, and we'll get more into parameters in the next video as well when we get into the actual web APIs. So this parameter here is basically a variable that gets attached to our query, and we're setting a value to this variable, right? So you say we have now a variable called URL, and it's equal to news.google.ca. So let's see how we can read this variable on the server side. So on the server side, this variable is going to be attached to the request or rec object here. I shortened it because I didn't want it to clash with the request library that we were about to import. Okay. So the URL, right, would be part of the query, and it would be called .url. So the whatever name of the parameter we're using, right, is going to be an object on this query object. So let's log it just to see if it works. Okay. And when we log things in the server, remember the way that we can see the log is by opening this log over here. Okay. So we can see here that the URL is being passed, and we're logging the value of this variable. Okay. And if we change this to this is being passed as a value, right? So this is being passed as a value through this URL variable. What if we don't provide anything, right? This gets now this gets undefined as the value. So let's put a little if statement here. We're going to say if URL, and if we just say if URL, it's going to mean it's going to check if the URL value is not undefined. Okay, and then we could put a little log here just to see that this is happening. So the log is not happening unless we put a variable. So query. Okay, so now we're getting something. So we're going to say if the variable, right, if the URL parameter was set, then we are going to send a request. And we are going to request this URL instead of hard coding the URL we're interested in here in our code. Okay. So now we're getting the result over here. And we could change this URL to, let's say, ryerson.ca. And now what we would be seeing being relayed to us, this is now the content, right? The HTML source for ryerson.ca. So not only did we create a route now on our website, we've added a parameter to this route, right? We've added a parameter called URL, and whatever we make this equal to, our server is going to open for us and then send the result back to the client. Okay? So over here, we could specify some other result, okay? And we would get the result in the console. Too many consoles here. Let me refresh. Wonder why this one's not opening. Oh, of course, because we have to change this URL over here. Let's go back to the index. Okay. So this is the content of whatever URL we're providing over here. Okay. And cool. Okay, so we're going to leave it at this for this video. It's getting a little bit long already, but I wanted to take the time to talk about what was happening in this new template that we're creating. In the next video, we're going to look into, okay, now that we have this basic template that has a Node.js server, right? The ability to create basic page routes on the server to fetch data from remote websites. How can we then use that to access those web databases? And we'll talk about some of the benefits as well that creating this Node.js server structure is going to afford us when programming in P5 for web APIs. So more into that, more about that in the next video.